Farmers, gardeners, and ranchers often ask me for a simple prescription to cure the ailment, be it a nitrogen issue, weeds, or any other wicked problem. They want to be told the answer. But just as there is no one way to raise a child, there is no single answer when thinking about soil. To find solutions to complex problems, new approaches and new thinking are required. What would nature do? Through a deepening of our relationship with nature's dynamics, we enhance natural systems, reduce waste, and reduce the need for external inputs. Happy New Year and welcome back to our podcast, Tasting Terroir, a journey that explores the link between healthy soil and the flavor and health of your food. I'm your host, Sarah Harper. That was an excerpt from the book For the Love of Soil by Nicole Masters. Nicole was born in Auckland, New Zealand. She is an independent agroecologist, systems thinker, author, and educator. Nicole's formal background is in ecology, soil science, and organizational learning from Otago and Auckland Universities. She has been providing agricultural consulting and extension services in regenerative agriculture since 2003 and is the director of Integrity Soils Limited. With her team of soil coaches, she works alongside producers in the US, Canada, and across Australasia. You'll get to hear more about the book and a discussion between Nicole and my co-host, Dr. Jill Clapperton, in my interview with them both later in this episode. But first, I want to take a moment to share an update with you about changes that we're making to the show for this coming year. It's been a while since we've talked. I'm sure you've noticed. I've missed bringing you all the amazing stories of people that are making our food system better by building up soil health. But alas, there are some things that are out of our control. Toward the end of last year, I got pretty sick and had to take some time to recover. Then, of course, there were the holidays. But even before that, I was realizing that the pace of creating a high-quality episode each week while balancing the attention I need to pay to the people actually paying me was getting out of balance. To put it in terms that this show deals with, I was mining myself dry and not allowing enough time to regenerate. It takes a lot of time to schedule, interview, edit, and produce an episode. All of these actions are a labor of love for me, but they are time-consuming nonetheless. And for me, there is no team to hand it off to. I do every aspect of the show myself. It was clear by the end of the year that the pace I was going at with this show wasn't sustainable. In thinking about how to address this challenge, I had a few different options, but what I did not want was for this show to devolve into a series of interviews with whoever I could grab, just to make sure that we kept getting an episode out each week. But I also did not want to pod fade, if you will, just steadily putting out fewer episodes at an unpredictable pace. To me, the reason to listen to this show versus many of the others about food or soil health lies almost completely in the fact that we can bring you access to some of the best people in this space through their connection to Dr. Jill Clapperton and others in our network, and through the knowledge I've accumulated over the past 20 years to provide a different perspective in the questions asked and the discussions shared. A different perspective than you would hear on most other shows that maybe focus on just the science or just the nutrition, but don't pull them all together. So I've decided to make some changes to the show, which will help make it a more sustainable project for me and hopefully a more reliable and valuable one for you. First, I'm moving the show release day to Mondays, starting today. This gives me the weekend to finish up an episode that I may need a little more time with, and it gives you a chance to start the week off right. Of course, you can listen to our shows anytime you want when you subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform, or listen to them through our website, globalfoodfarm.com, and just click the podcast tab. Next, I'm going to release new episodes every other week instead of every week. This will ensure that I'm putting forward really high-quality shows while not shortchanging the folks in our community who value what we do enough to pay for it. Finally, I'm going to start our episodes with a clip or two from various presentations and work that Dr. Jill Clapperton has done on the topics of soil health and nutrient density, in addition to providing a feature interview in each episode. In this way, you'll get a chance to learn more about the science behind building up soil health from one of the best sources out there. This background will help empower you as a consumer and home gardener, as well as giving you a base to get even more out of the expert interviews that we feature. I know you didn't ask for this explanation, but I did want to let you know that I really appreciate you, our audience, and I view this show as building a relationship, not just pushing out marketing content. Of course, you can always find more information and go to a deeper level on the topics we discuss here by joining our private social network, globalfoodfarm.com. We'd love to have you. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, on with the show. Following our new format, I'm going to start this episode by sharing a clip from one of Dr. Jill Clapperton's most in-demand recent topics. She presented this information at the United Kingdom's groundswell event and has subsequently shared it with our network. In this clip, she explains why keeping the soil covered is so important and how plant roots play a vital role in building up good soil structure that life depends on.
We need to actually cover the soil and remove or totally get rid of any kind of soil erosion, because as soon as we start losing our soil, we lose our capacity for any kind of soil health. Because what runs off first? It's the light stuff. It's not the sand and the rocks and things. It's the topsoil that runs off. It's the organic matter that runs off. It's the organic matter that dissolves and runs off. And so we lose our entire capacity for having soil health as soon as we have any kind of runoff, any kind of soil erosion of any kind. The characteristic that really defines soil health or healthy soil is soil structure. And it's one of the easiest things to measure. So infiltration can also be a measure of soil structure. If we have good soil structure, we have better rooting. We have created a better habitat. And as soon as we have the roots can penetrate the soil more, that means that they can get more energy, they can get more nutrients, they can actually explore the soil more so that they can tap into these other nutrients. And the more they explore the soil and the more they find more nutrients, the more lateral roots they'll make, because lateral roots cost energy. And you need to have the photosynthesis in order to support lateral roots. So you can see, once again, how having better rooting gives you better above ground, and better above ground can give you more rooting. Roots in soil are mixed with bacteria, fungi, protozoa, microarthropods, earthworms, insects, algae, and we all act to create soil structure. And this leads to, right, better water and air infiltration, so better water and air quality. You get root penetration, which gives you better above ground growth, which leads to better rooting. You get more predator-prey interactions, which means that you start to recycle your nutrients. You have a greater diversity of soil organisms, which microorganisms and fauna. Decomposition starts happening above and below ground, and not just below ground, because below ground is our number one source of carbon. And we get a lot more plant communication, which means that resources are moving from a source to a sink. So a plant in your row that's struggling perhaps or doesn't have quite enough can actually be shuttled some of the nutrients it needs from the other plants that are within that community.
As you can see from Jill's description, soil structure plays a key role in so many different aspects of growing healthy food. And the practices that farmers use on the field can play a big part in improving that soil structure and therefore the health of the soil. This will be helpful to keep in mind as you hear from our next guest. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce you to another fantastic soil health educator and consultant, Nicole Masters, and her book, For the Love of Soil. As noted in the introduction, she has a long history of helping others to improve their soil health, and in so doing, improve their businesses, their lives, and of course, the food and fiber that comes from it. In the first part of the interview, Jill and Nicole exchange insights about their shared journey to improve soil health, followed by my interview with Nicole about her book.
Just looking for work. Congratulations on the book.
Oh, thank you. That means
great.
a lot.
It's a great book. Yeah.
As I'm getting more feedback from people who are like, I was, a hardcore conventional high input, and this book changed my life. And I'm like, that's what it's about, and it's not the messenger, it's the message. How do we find those catalysts to spark someone off? And who knows what they're going to do, but hopefully that involves using a lot less ag chemical and being more profitable and having insects and everything come back.
But intuitively, Nicole, we all know that what you're doing is affecting food quality and the nutritional composition of the food. We just haven't been able to measure it yet.
Yeah. So I'm very excited to be able to see us be able to do this, because this is the piece that's really missing. And I think, talking with the brands, there's a lot, like the clothing brands are really getting it, which is interesting. And so it's like the clothing guys want to drive it. They're not necessarily measuring nutrient density, but they're getting in behind it because they're closer to a consumer that's saying, hey, we want this kind of output. And I think the commodity market's kind of slowing things down, obviously, on that side. So it's like, how do we find these marketplaces and support the people that are going to provide that? Let's just go around the commodity system, because we can't, I just don't know how we're going to work within it.
Everybody holds up isolated cases. What I hear all the time is like, oh, well, there's only one or two. And I'm like, no, there are lots of people that are doing really amazing things. You just don't hear about them all the time, because some of them are really introverted and they're just doing their own thing.
Well, they're doing their work.
Little tiny things help other things. That's why I like whole foods, and I like people talking about whole systems, is because we don't know what tiny little change or what organism that changes everything, like does that metabiosis change. We don't know what those organisms are. And that tiny change might be in 10 years' time going to change the whole thing.
Yeah.
And we have no idea.
I think, being able to measure the quality of the food at the output is one way that we can start to capture this without these huge data sets.
Well, it's also, when you think about it, actionable results are really what counts. Like, what can I action? I have all these numbers. What do they mean? Can I do anything to affect them? Which is why we really need these curated experiments so that we can start to understand what is changing. How are we changing? What are we doing?
I had this aha moment. I work with horses. I love horses. They're kind of one of my first loves. And this brilliant instructor I was working with said, the premise of natural horsemanship, which is a lot of my training's based on, is deeply flawed because it's based on animals in the wild that are not domesticated, that are in a flight or fight stage. And you're basing all of these assumptions on that. And I'm like, mind literally blown. Oh my God. And so it's like, where do we come from when we are making some of these choices? And it could be a deeply flawed assumption that we decide, in a couple of decades' time.
Well, we're not based on natural systems. We're based on a very high intensity tillage-based system with lots of chemical inputs. And we're expecting to make decisions based on that. And we can't. I mean, it's sort of like when I'm learning about nutrition. I mean, most of our daily requirements are based on your average middle-aged man.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not that.
Yeah.
And so how does it work for me?
Yeah. Well, I think it's the science of averages, and what we're seeing are all these outliers that is the really fascinating place, and where the curiosity should be. And scientists that I come across are ignoring the outliers. And I'm like, surely as a scientist, the definition is curiosity, is to let's look at those. What is going on over there? And it's been a little frustrating, I must say. And now I'm just like, we'll just get on with it.
Get on with it. Just move along.
Move along.
Because the farmers are going to push hard and the producers are going to push hard. And so you either get out of the way or jump on the wagon.
Yeah.
Well, along those lines, I wanted to get maybe both of you to share your perspective about, so you talk about it a lot in the book, and of course your work with producers, Nicole, is that I've really tried to build this path for value-added capture for regenerative farmers. That's they deserve it. They deserve it, and it should be there and all of that. But I've had to kind of retreat back to look, farmers should just do this for themselves because it's so much better for their health, their personal health, their stress level, their land, save their costs, reduce their inputs, all of that. And they should still fight for a claim of the value that they're creating. They shouldn't give up on that. But especially with high inputs, that catches people's attention and adds another level of stress for conventional farmers that maybe is an opportunity for some of them to come to this thing that may have been off-putting to them, or they may see it like organic or another niche that seems like I can't be that, or that's not me, or, So do you see that? And what's your experience with this time and with the appeal to regenerative to farmers that may be more open to transitioning?
I definitely think that nitrogen prices are very stimulatory on thinking outside the box. And I make the pretty bold claim that I'll stand by, is that I can walk onto any high input conventional property, reduce their nitrogen inputs by 30% without any change in yield. And I'm very confident in being able to say that. And I think that's got to be something that's attractive to people in terms of, I ask this question in my workshops, which is, what do you value about the current modern conventional system? Because there's entrenched values that people feel when we're talking about conventional agriculture or regenerative agriculture, that we're actually attacking their values. It's not about this different idea. It's about, you are literally attacking what I care about and what I value. Okay, so what are the values of that in conventional agriculture? Well, maybe it's efficiencies, maybe it's the machinery, the technology, the commodity market, not having to do all the marketing. Well, okay, cool. Well, let's keep those pieces that are your values that work well. We don't have to throw everything out with the bathwater. And then look at, how do we bring that into a system where we are bringing more vibrant health to that ecosystem and fulfilling on other things you might value, which might be your own health, spending time with family, profitability, whatever that piece is. And I think what we're going through is a society of polarization where people can't talk about anything. If that's guns or politics or immunizations or whatever. And so we're creating this society that can no longer have any conversation about things. And this is happening with conventional and regenerative, is people like digging their heels in and like throwing stuff over a parapet at each other, instead of, hey, there's some pieces of this that we know that work really well. Okay, let's think about that. And then what is the downside if we go too far in one extreme or the other? And let's talk about that. If you only build soil health, but you're not profitable and your animal performance is suffering, okay, cool, let's pull that back a little bit. There's this pendulum of, okay, for you as an individual, what are your goals? How do we work with that? And I'm always concerned about dogma and the wrong and righteousness that kind of comes into industries. And I think that is very off-putting to people. People getting really adamant. Let's say glyphosate, that's another one of these polarizing topics people get real mad about. Hey, you're doing the best you can with what you've got. What are other ways that we can help increase that efficacy while you work this out? And maybe that's going to take you 3 to 7 years. I don't know what it looks like, but I think it's everyone's individual responsibility to just be empathetic, just start listening to each other. That's I think I went down a rabbit hole. I apologize.
No, it's wonderful. Wonderful. I know you share a lot of that, Jill. I've heard you talk in a similar vein.
It's all about helping people take the first step. And part of that is just like Nicole said, is starting a conversation and understanding that there's so much similarity. Like, if we focus on what we have in common instead of what we don't have in common, I think we get along. We'll move along so much better. Because if we really looked at it, okay, I might be not this or I'm not that, but I'm all these other things, and so are you. Well, we have a lot in common, so let's focus on what we have in common. Let's focus on the positive and not on the negative. And let's not pigeonhole ourselves, because there's thousands of shades of gray. Everything isn't just black and white. And I think that's an important thing to think about too, is that, and everybody has their own level of risk tolerance. Yeah. And what they can, and what steps they can take. Maybe I could take this step, but you can take this other big step. because that's your level of tolerance. Well, good. Congratulations, but I'm happy for you to do that. And I'm happy. And please just tolerate the fact that I can only take a small step, and embrace the fact that I'm taking any step at all. And I think that that's an important thing.
For people that aren't as familiar with you, I mean, you've got this great book that's For the Love of Soil. And really, maybe just tell people what went into that and what does that give them when they dive into that book?
Yeah, I was often asked to write a book for like soils for dummies, and there's really nothing stupid about producers or soil. So trying to find a way of my implicit understanding when I'm out in the field and I can see things, see what weeds are saying, what are these insects saying, what are the species diversity and animal health, how is this all speaking? And then how do I make that explicit in a way that someone could take the book and walk out in the field and start to think, let's dig a hole. What are we seeing here? How do we know if this is healthy or not healthy? What are the implications? Is my water cycle working? Am I even growing good nutrient dense food? So to just really empower somebody so that they can start to see and read the landscape. Yeah.
And obviously producers, farmers and ranchers would get a lot from understanding, the different chapters that you go through and really talking about the underground microbiome, the livestock, all of that helps make soil healthy. But I found too, and I listened to the audiobook and I appreciate you reading it. It's always nice to hear the author, read it.
So. Yeah. I mean, it's not you can go, that's not a hugely professional speaking voice, but I must say every book that I've really enjoyed has been read by the author. There's, I think it's Braiding Sweetgrass. It's just such a phenomenal book, and she could be a professional reader, but the impact that has, it's someone actually speaking to you directly. It feels like
right from their real experience, and as you tell the stories, you're remembering them. You're sharing them, and but what I thought was great too is that it's very accessible for consumers and for people that aren't farmers. I mean, there's obviously a lot of detail for the farmers. But there are kind of a new class of consumers that are starting to get really interested in this and understanding the link between soil health and the microbiome and their gut health and all of that. And so there's a tremendous amount of information for them. Did you have consumers in mind as you're doing this book too? Or how is that? This is a challenge to balance these audiences. How are you thinking about consumers?
Well, part of it too was thinking about anyone that eats food needs to know this. Like what is actually happening in the food system and why, in a way that's not like, oh, farmers and ranchers are so bad, they're doing all these terrible things. And it's like, well, here's the structures that are in play and here's some of the history as to why this has come about. And I think understanding that is what empowers us too, so that when you go to your farmer's market or you're in Whole Foods, you can ask specific questions so that it's going to help against the greenwashing, I think, of food systems, where people will just say, oh, it's natural. And you're like, well, what does that actually mean? Or it's regenerative. Okay, can you explain to me how you see regenerative agriculture? And spray free. Okay, well, what does that mean? Or organic. Oh, you mean you've cultivated your fields 1,000 times and chopped up all the microbiology? Okay, I'm interested in what you're doing. So it was very much, if you eat food, let's think about what's in that food. What are some of the food additives that are not, I often think we shouldn't be labeling organic, we should be labeling what sprays went onto this food so you can make a better decision about, actually, you know what? I don't want dicamba and paraquat and glyphosate to be on my food. I look forward to that.
And that's back to the point you raised earlier with Jill too about, glyphosate, and that was great that you brought that up, because environmental groups, well-meaning in some cases, but they often will shine a light on one thing, just like brands will shine a light on one thing as like it's as a positive. Well, some of the activist groups shine a light on one thing that's a negative, and both are missing the holistic link between everything. Like it almost seems impossible for us to talk about a holistic system, just kind of like we're so polarized. So we get into these us versus them. Well, everything has a counter effect. And so how do you think farmers that you're working with, they already know that and they've been pushed out of that because of kind of the input system that they have to work within, or has it become less intuitive as they've gone to school and this is how you been taught, this is how you farm?
I can't think of many producers that were born with it, or some of them had influences from grandparents that still remember some of the traditional knowledge, or working with people that, have exposure to indigenous traditional thinking and knowledge that are thinking in whole systems. But our whole education system, our whole language, the Western language is designed to describe things as nouns and separate everything. And so we go through academics, or we go through school, or even how we're raised to see things in their separate pieces instead of the whole. And that was part of the challenge of the book too, is like, let's zoom in, but then we need to keep zooming out. Mm-hmm. We need to, and we do that for our own body. It's like, I don't know, like say you've got a rash and you just put cream and you keep putting cream on that rash until you get allergic to that cream probably. Instead of going, okay, what have I been eating in the last week? What have I washing my clothes in? What's that piece? And that diagnostic, and that's where I think the diagnostics in this book that talk about looking at landscape also apply of thinking about the human body. And the more that we can keep thinking, how does this work in nature, and what would be an unintended consequence of doing this? I think the anti-brigade, like let's say glyphosate, we hate glyphosate, we're going to ban it, is the other side of the hand of hey, we're going to use dicamba and genetically engineer it. It's not really shifting our whole system's thinking. Mm-hmm. And if we ban glyphosate, you know what? There's going to be another chemical behind it, and it's probably going to be worse.
What about paraquat?
Oh, great. Yeah, let's talk about paraquat, shall we? And someone who
you have personal experience with that one.
Yeah, it's the joy of people that have had multiple chemical exposures from the womb. So my mother and father were both, and my grandparents were exposed to PFOS and PFAS through the military. And so the influence that's had on epigenetics, and I have a gene called the MTHFR gene, which about 40 million Americans have. But it gets switched on by exposure to chemicals early in life. And what it does is it means that the methylation pathway in my body to detoxify through the liver doesn't work. And that's why I got so sick with paraquat. But I think that's part of my passion, is like, we can have a little bit of chemical exposure and not get sick. And we can do that even in agricultural settings. If we set up a microbiome that's incredibly healthy and vibrant, you could have glyphosate coming down in the rainfall, you can have sprayer from the neighbors, and you still have a microbiome that's able to consume and break that down and recover. But we don't have that anymore. So it's that, and thinking about that with our own human bodies, right? How do I build resilience in every single aspect of life? And that includes my mental resilience, my physical resilience, and the resilience of land.
Well, and that's so interesting, because a number of the producers in our network that Jill works with, they haven't, because they do no-till, they always do, never till. Some of them, do end up needing to use small amounts of glyphosate, much less than they ever, did. And yet they test the end result of the actual grain, and it's glyphosate free. I mean, it's not there because, to your point, their soil is so healthy from all the other things that they've done that any residual stuff, it's not sprayed on the crop, and it's, all of that. And it's not used as a desiccant, of course. And then the soil is able to break down completely whatever little amount was left before it was planted. And so, if you're looking at the actual grain that they're going to sell, it doesn't have it there. Yeah. And yet, the system isn't designed to look at that. The system is designed to just look at, did you ever use it, and treat someone that ever used it the same as someone that way overused it. That caused a lot of problems. Yeah.
And I think one of my early ahas about this was in 2006 in a project in New Zealand where they applied 2,4-D to soil that was being regeneratively managed, and that all that 2,4-D was gone. Like not a sink. They couldn't find a trace of it at all. It had been split out into its different components. And, what does it take to build a system like that? And then, what's the quality of what we're measuring? So, I'm in total agreement with your point, Sarah.
Well, and because when you push to ban certain things, again, not in this holistic, like picking certain things and we're going to ban that, then you're going to push a lot of people to tillage. You're going to you're going to do other kinds of destruction that doesn't show up on the little spotlight that you're looking at, but could be far more destructive to the overall goal. And a lot of times those edicts are being pushed by people that don't know anything about the soil, about microbiome, about farming, about anything. They just have their pet project that they're going to drive this issue and, do a lot of harm.
And I think there's so much research now about glyphosate and about how destructive it is, but you could point that to every single ag chemical.
Yeah.
All of them, if you ran down that rabbit hole. I mean, there are a couple I do think need to be removed from sale, and that would be things like chlorpyralids and neonicotinoids. I do think there's a couple that really don't belong to exist in the world at all. And there's other ways that we can substitute in terms of, biocontrols on seeds, or, there's other options. But I think in terms of glyphosate, it's easy to target it because there is so much negative research that's just growing. But then go and do that on paraquat, go and do that on dicamba or 2,4-D, and we're not going to be happy with any of them. So let's look at how do we need to do crop rotations where every 3 years or 4 years you take that crop out and you're going to put in, multi-species cover crops and allow that soil to recover and rejuvenate, bring in livestock. What are you going to do to kind of earn the right to use that chemical input?
That's a great way. That's a great way of reframing it, because that's the other thing. And to your point about it being so partisan and so just polarized, like if you say anything of nuance about glyphosate, then you're automatically accused of like shilling for the chemical companies, which, our whole point is we want producers to be able to depend less on all of it, on all of the inputs. And that's what you and Jill help them do. And we want more producers to be able to depend less on it. But, just this simplistic idea that people outside of the knowledge of the system can come in and start diagnosing. Like, you wouldn't go in and tell your brain surgeon, well, actually, I think you need to do it this way, and I don't think you should be able to use that tool at all, ever.
Yeah. No anesthetic. Just don't do that.
No, just cure me. That's what I want. But, so I'm wondering too, because our podcast is Tasting Terroir. And, I think that there are increasingly you can, if you have a garden, or if you work with producers, or you grow your own food, the difference that can come in the taste of something, even just because it's fresh and because you picked it right away and ate it. But then as you add these practices, have you had experiences with seeing a change in flavor? Obviously the nutritional changes there, but have you yourself or with others that you've worked with see that connection, or what are your thoughts about that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think of a couple of them, and it's almost an orgasmic experience. Thinking back, there's a cherry producer in the Hawke's Bay in New Zealand that's been running a program for quite a while. And every year just before Christmas, because that's when cherry season is, I'd go and buy like 3 or 4 boxes, and I'd probably eat like 5 pounds myself in the drive home. Like the flavor is insane. And now they've got to the point where there is a line of traffic on the side of the road pre-Christmas lining up, and you're only allowed to buy 1 box of cherries because the demand is so huge. And so I have to bring like 3 friends so I can get my 3 boxes. And I'm like, no, I'm not sharing with you. But it's like an experience that you can't even compare it to anything that we eat that you buy from the grocery store. It's not like buying a box of candy or, just fruit and vegetables you would normally buy. Like the experience is so nourishing, and I don't need to eat 5 pounds, and maybe I don't, but I do have a bit of a thing for cherries. But I was at Apricot Lane Farms this summer, and, to eat that fruit that's coming off that property, and it's like every single piece of fruit, just there's like your palate, the whole thing's expansive, and you feel literally like you're more energized after eating that kind of food and have that kind of experience. And I think we've forgotten. And I remember actually my son, when he was 2 years old, and I couldn't find him, and I was a terrible parent, and I had these big long concrete steps, and I'm like, oh my gosh, where is he? And I'm going crazy, running round and round and round. And then I ran up to my dad's place. He was like, I don't know, 400 feet away. And there I find him underneath this. We had one of these blood plums, like the Japanese blood plums, and he's sitting underneath this tree, and he's just, just dripping everywhere with this incredible fruit. And it's like that little guy was like, I know where the good stuff is, and he's gonna go and test for it. And actually watching him as a teenager, even eating food out of our garden, we were growing a kale with a bricks of 15. I put that as a challenge to all of you that are listening. You see if you can grow a kale at 15, because, oh my gosh, it is sweet, it is flavorful. And to watch him walk to school and grab a handful of kale on the way to the school bus, and I'm like, that's not normal. Like, children shouldn't want to grow a handful of kale and eat that. But we haven't kind of destroyed their taste buds at that stage of life either.
Yeah, well, that is the other important thing, setting up somebody's palate well from the beginning, and then also giving yourself patience that you can reset your palate. That even if you haven't been eating well, that you can give yourself time, and you will start to really both sense the subtleties of these different minerals that are in healthy grown food and appreciate them. Yeah.
I think that was my biggest shock moving to the US is I couldn't tell the difference between pork, lamb, beef, and chicken, because it just tastes like corn. And I'm like, where? And then people are like, oh, I don't like grass-fed because it's so gamey. And I'm like, what is that? Well, one, let's not eat gamey beef. Like, that is a flavor profile that maybe you don't want. But, I think of Older Spring Ranch out in Idaho. Their beef is so sweet and so tender and so flavorful. And they're grazing on native prairie. And through their grazing management, they've increased their ground cover and their species diversity by 300%. And it comes through the meat. You can taste it. So I think my challenge is sometimes dealing with people that only want to eat stuff that tastes like corn is let's play a game. Let's really try and taste some of these different things. And can you even taste it? And maybe you can't taste it because you got ketchup all over everything, or you're drinking Coca-Cola, or I don't know. I think what we've seen is, more salt and more sugar in preserved food. So that stuff is tasting better, while the food on the stores is tasting worse because there's very low nutrient density in it. So I can understand why people are eating processed food. We just got to get them over the bridge and onto good quality food.
Yeah, well, and then in your last chapter, you talk about, like the future is now, and the role of the consumer. And I'm very passionate about that too. I feel like consumers have to both ask for better, support better, and really do more than just, there's all this consumer research that says that especially younger consumers, they want this and they want that, but obviously they aren't following through because the processors aren't providing it. I mean, they just aren't. They won't take it. I mean, with all the brand claims about regenerative, you would be surprised. People would be surprised to know that the inside of the food industry just really doesn't want it. It's a complication. If it were all just, you could keep the same commodity structure, they'd be fine with it. But they don't want the personalized, the connection, the traceability, all of that. At least that's my experience. What's been yours?
Well, we were looking at working with the largest dairy producer in New Zealand to have a regenerative label, right? And talk about, this milk is higher in CLA and all of these different components of milk. And the reason that they turned us down in the end was, but that makes our mainstream product sound like it's bad. And they were like, oh, and I'm like, okay, that I can see that as a marketing problem. But also, I mean, the commodity system is designed to make those suppliers a lot of money and not be paying the producers. So really, it's the whole system that needs to shift. And, I'd like to think that consumers have power, but really it is these guys that are steering where they get product from. And, if you think of some of these producers, I think of like Eastern Montana. It's like, how are you going to get a product to someone's table in California? It's incredibly difficult. And the only place you can sell stuff into is the commodity market. So I think if we can close the number of steps and create more cooperative models and be looking at the quality of what we are then getting into the marketplace. And we're seeing some really cool stuff. I saw some really good examples of this when I was in the UK last week of producer groups getting together and actually having that supply chain minimized. How many steps are there before you get to marketplace? And yeah, it's going to take a community in order to do that, but very difficult to do by yourself.
There are a number of producers who are in some of our network who are actually selling direct to the public and selling through online. And what do you think about that? Because it's obviously they're going to be limited in their scope, but does that have the ability to shape the larger commodities and the larger brands and what they're doing?
It would be nice to think so.
Yeah, it would be.
I just think, ranching and farming, producing food is a full-time commitment in itself. And then we need to add on that next layer, or you're going to add on chickens and turkeys. You're going to add all these pieces, and then you're going to direct market that. And then you're going to be talking to producers and consumers. And, like that whole piece, it's friends of mine that do it and do it very well. All I would say have ADHD. They're people that don't sleep and that seem to thrive off high stress. And, if that's your goal, then I think that's brilliant. Do it. But I also think we need to be thinking as communities and how do we do this more collaboratively instead of I'm isolated, I'm separate, and I need to kind of control all of this and do it all myself. Because it is a recipe for a burnout. And then what are you dropping? Oh, okay, I don't spend time with the kids. Oh, cool.
Yeah. No, it's an excellent point. And then maybe that consumer demand or questions could be turned toward a systematic requirements or obviously all of these buyers have specs that they fulfill. Well, I know we're coming to the end of our hour. So what is your definition of regenerative agriculture?
This is the thing with definitions. I hate boxes. It's kind of like, what is the definition of conventional agriculture? Good luck. So I like Lady Eve Balfour when she was talking about organics. She said organics is an attitude. And I think that's a big part of regenerative agriculture. So we define it as a way of being in the world. And it's a way of being that encompasses complex, ecological, adaptive systems thinking. So it's the thinking that is given by your way of being in the world. And for us, it's a journey, that you're on a journey of growing food or turf and fiber that improves the outcomes for soil health, biodiversity, ecosystem health, while producing high nutrient dense quality food and happy producers. So if you're not profitable and you're miserable and you're stressed out, you're not regenerative. I'm sorry, in my definition.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, thanks so much, Nicole.
No, I look forward to seeing what you guys create. The world needs it. We are ready. So bring it on.
Okay. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay. You've been listening to Tasting Terroir, a podcast made possible by a magical collaboration between the following companies and supporters, all working together to help farmers, chefs, food companies, and consumers to build healthier soil for a healthier world. Rhizoterra. Owned by Dr. Jill Clapperton, Rhizoterra is an international food security consulting company providing expert guidance for creating healthy soils that yield tasty, nutrient-dense foods. Check us out at rhizoterra.com. That's rhizoterra.com. And the Global Food and Farm online community, an ad-free global social network and soil health streaming service that provides information and connections that help you apply the science and practice of improving soil health. Join us at globalfoodandfarm.com. And from listeners like you who support us through our Patreon account at patreon.com/tastingterroir. Patrons receive access to our full-length interviews and selected additional materials. patrons will also have the opportunity to submit questions that we will answer on the podcast. Tune in next week to hear more interviews and insights with myself, Sarah Harper, and Dr. Jill Clapperton, as well as the regenerative farmers, chefs, and emerging food companies in the global food and farm online community and beyond. If you like our work, please give us a 5-star rating and share the podcast with your friends. Thanks so much for listening and for helping us get the word out about this new resource to taste the health of your food. Until next week, stay curious, keep improving, and don't stop believing that better is possible when knowledge is available.